Chapter 24-25. Her reaction made Xiao Ran feel strange. Didn't I mention it to you before? He scratched his head. Oh, it's mainly because everyone in the Illusion God Palace knows about it, so I might have forgotten to tell you. But is there something wrong? Chu Luiyue frowned slightly, but her heart was in turmoil. She knew that there were several god envoys in the Illusion God Palace, each with different duties, but she never thought that there would be 13 of them. How could it be so coincidental? Her 13 U-Guard, also 13 of them. Something flashed across Chu Luiyue's mind. She wanted to grab hold of it, but it was too late when she reacted. No, nothing, she murmured and shook her head. She lowered her eyes slightly, hiding the emotions in her eyes. How could it be? Maybe she was thinking too much? The 13 U-Guard had been with her since she was young. They had accompanied her for more than 10 years. During this period, they had experienced many things together, even crossing life and death. No one knew the 13 U-Guard better than her. But the 13 god envoys of the Illusion God Palace were powerful existences that had been here for more than 10,000 years. The difference was like heaven and earth. It should be a coincidence. Xiao Ran reached out and waved his hand in front of her eyes. Are you really okay? She didn't look like one at all. Chu Luiyue looked up. Her expression had returned to normal, and she smiled faintly. I'm really fine. I just remembered that the 13 U-Guard following me is also 13 people, so I thought it was a bit coincidental. Oh, is that so? Xiao Ran finally understood. That's true. But it seems that not all of your subordinates are here? Chu Luiyue nodded. A few of them stayed at home. Peach Blossom Cove was indeed her home to a certain extent. I see. But it's a bit of a pity. Xiao Ran said with interest. I saw that the few of them that came to the Illusion God Palace are all very talented and have excellent performances. Not to mention others, just that Qi Han alone comprehended all the Xian formations on the Star Passage not long after him and successfully entered the Illusion God Palace. When Xiao Ran heard about this, his heart was filled with jealousy. It was one thing for Chu Luiyue to be a pervert, but even his subordinates were so savage. If he remembered correctly, Qi Han had only been in the Illusory God Palace for a month. Compared to him, who had spent 10,000 years to finally understand the final profound formation under Chu Luiyue's unintentional guidance, the other party had won far too easily. Besides Qi Han, her remaining subordinates were not to be underestimated either, even if they didn't have a bloodline totem. Therefore, Xiao Ran's praise was sincere. Chu Luiyue's lips curved up. They are indeed very outstanding. The first divine envoy rang the bell and closed the door. The remaining divine envoys were also summoned and gathered at the plaza in front of the Illusory God Palace. Looking at the figures standing at the top of the 9 steps, the divine envoys bowed respectfully when they arrived. Greetings, First Oracle. Mu Qinghe's expression was indifferent and calm. She stood with her hands behind her back. The other divine envoys weren't surprised by her reaction. The First Oracle's status had transcended, and she was the strongest person under the Divine Master. Naturally, she was different from them. However, a few people looked at the Yuqian without batting an eyelid. All these years, the First Oracle had been in seclusion. Almost all the matters of the Illusory God Palace were handled by the Second Oracle. Many people secretly guessed that the Divine Master had given him power on purpose. It was also because of this that the Yu Qian's reputation and power had been rising all these years. Many people treated him no differently from the First Oracle, who knew that when the Heavenly Gate was about to close, the First Oracle would suddenly make a move. He didn't even leave the courtyard and taught the Yu Qian a great lesson. He made him kneel outside the door for 3 days and 3 nights. This slap was loud and clear. Although the people outside didn't know, the people in the Illusory God Palace were very clear about it. Who wouldn't be shocked? With this kneel, all the hard work the Yu Qian had done for the past few years was scattered. It also destroyed the fame and power he had painstakingly built up. The Second Oracle couldn't surpass the First Oracle after all. This made many people who were eager to make a move suppress their restless thoughts. They didn't dare to have any other thoughts. Even if the first oracle hadn't appeared for many years, she was still an existence that couldn't be provoked in the illusory god palace except for the divine master. The Yu Qian naturally noticed the gazes around him. He was a little impatient and frustrated, but he didn't show it on his face. The previous incident had already happened. The only thing he could do now was to try his best to cover it up. However, when he looked at the tall and straight grayish-blue figure above him, he couldn't help but grit his teeth. So many years of hard work, all went down the drain because of one sentence. Let alone the Yu Qian, even if it was anyone else, they wouldn't be able to let it go easily. Mu Qinghe was the first oracle. She had the divine master behind her. Thinking of this, the Yu Qian retracted his gaze. He looked around and frowned slightly. Why aren't Jiu Long and Shi Yan back yet? As soon as he said this, all the oracles quieted down. After a while, Jin Yunlai said, "Didn't the emperor punish them to the illusory god ocean?" Actually, they had all heard about this matter, but they didn't know what exactly was going on. Offend? How did they offend her? The two of them were sent by the first oracle to find the third score, but in the end, they didn't find it. Instead, they came back with their tails between their legs and were punished to the illusory god ocean. No one knew what happened in between. Shu Jing suddenly thought of something. He looked in a certain direction and said indifferently, "Maybe we should ask the Shangguan Yu about this matter?" The fact that the first two scores had recognized her as the owner was now an open secret among the oracles. Because of this, they couldn't do anything to her now. However, they had waited until today. Shu Jing suddenly smiled. The heavenly gate is closed, and all the cultivators have ascended to the heavens and become gods. This time, she should be returning the score to the illusory god palace in its entirety, right? No one said anything, but their expressions showed that they agreed. After all, it belonged to the illusory god palace. How could it always fall into the hands of others? This was the best time to get the music score back. Fan Yunxiao heard this and looked curiously in the direction of his gaze. Are you talking about that woman in red? He had never seen Chu Luiyue before. Shu Jing nodded. Fan Yunxiao narrowed her eyes. I'm afraid she won't agree if we ask for it directly, right? After all, it was a supreme treasure. She had been in the illusory god palace for so long and hadn't returned it. Would she be willing this time? Shu Jing laughed. It's not up to her. Chapter 24-26. Fan Yunxiao laughed. That's true. During this period of time, Chu Luiyue had become famous in the illusory god palace. She had even completed the star path and entered the illusory god palace. But her status was there for all to see. She had no choice in many things and could only accept them. Forget it. As for the zither score and her matters, the Divine Master and the first Divine Envoy will take care of them in the future. We don't have to worry too much. Shu Jing glanced at Fan Yunxiao. Now, we have other more important things to do. The so-called more important things were naturally supervising the many cultivators to ascend to the heavens and become gods. Third Divine Envoy, do you have the list? Fan Yunxiao's expression froze. I do, but it's not all. These words were tactful. Before ascending to the heavens and becoming gods, the divine envoys gathered together in the illusory god palace to have a clear understanding of the overall situation. Who had how many top-notch medicinal herbs in their hands and whether they could successfully break through to the medical sage realm in the end. Who had the precious materials and whether they could take the opportunity to refine a sacred artifact. There were also many secret arts and techniques. To a large extent, these contents determined whether a cultivator had the possibility of ascending to the heavens and becoming gods. Even though they couldn't be completely sure, as divine envoys, they had to have some idea of these things. However, looking at Fan Yunxiao, it was obvious that it couldn't be done. Shu Jing's expression changed slightly. Didn't Treasure Pavilion send the account book over? Fan Yunxiao sneered. Send it? I personally went to borrow it, but I was rejected. As soon as these words were said, the expressions of the divine envoys turned ugly. They had to admit that in this aspect, Treasure Pavilion's account book was more complete. But now, they refused to lend it to them. If it was someone else, it would be fine, but the person behind Treasure Pavilion? They couldn't afford to offend him. Xu Jing thought for a moment and asked suspiciously, could it be that this is what that person wants? Fan Yunxiao's expression turned cold. Eighth Divine Envoy, be careful with your words. Xu Jing suddenly came to his senses. He pursed his lips and swallowed the rest of his words. At this moment, Yu Qian said calmly, that doesn't matter. Today, everyone would be gathered here. Everything was predestined. More and more cultivators appeared in the square in front of the main hall of the illusory palace. At this moment, the door was wide open. Although the people outside couldn't come in, they could still get a general view. Countless gazes were focused on the people in the illusory shrine. Of course, what they saw the most was the first divine envoy, who was standing on the steps. After all, he was the most mysterious one. Suddenly, that person raised his head and looked outside the door. His gaze seemed to have passed through the star path and looked at the tightly shut heavenly gate. However, as he moved, the crowd could finally see his face clearly. Is that the first oracle? Standing on top of the 9 steps with a bronze bell hanging beside him. Who else could it be other than the first divine envoy? He seems to be quite young. I heard that he is much stronger than the second divine envoy. After all, he is someone who is highly regarded by the Divine Master. Naturally, he is different. Outside the door, the crowd was discussing. Behind the crowd, there was one person who was looking at the high figure with a complicated expression. It's really him, Jian Fengqi murmured in a low voice. Although Mu Hongyu had told him about this before, when he saw it with his own eyes, it was still, for a moment, he didn't know how to describe his feelings. From a distance, he couldn't see very clearly. But that was Mu Qinghe. Jian Fengqi had been friends with him for more than 10 years. How could he not recognize her? But that person, after all, was completely different from the person in his memory. Mu Qinghe? Little Hachi, who was planning to laze around and wait, looked up unintentionally. When she saw that familiar face, she was shocked on the spot. Her mind went blank for a moment. Then, she turned her neck stiffly and looked at Jian Fengqi with difficulty. That person? Am I seeing things? Jian Fengqi closed his eyes and didn't say anything. But this answer was enough. Little Hachi opened her mouth, and her mind was in a mess. Madame 12, who was standing at the side, also saw this scene. She was stunned and subconsciously raised her finger. Isn't that Brother Qinghe? Madame 11 frowned and pressed her hand down. He's not. Madame 12 turned around and saw that Madame 11 was also staring at that person. That expression, Madame 12 was conflicted for a while, but she couldn't help but say, Sister? Sister? That's Brother Qinghe. How could they not recognize this face? Madame 11 pursed her lips and looked at little Hachi. Sister 8, he's not, right? Her voice, which had always been crisp and clear, was now slightly hoarse for some reason. Who was Mu Qinghe? He was someone who had followed Master for many years, just like the 13 Yu guards. In fact, compared to the 13 Yu guards, Master had spent more time with him and was more attentive. Mu Qinghe was in the light, while the 13 Yu guards were in the dark. Everyone had their own duties. In the past, Madame 11 and Madame 12 often went to play with Hong Yao and Dumpling, so they were closer to Mu Qinghe. At that time, Dumpling even called him Little 9. But later, he and the 13 Yu guards parted ways. Although no one had said it explicitly, Madame 11 and Madame 12 knew some things, including Mu Qinghe's betrayal and his death. But now, he actually appeared just like that? And he was the first oracle. Little Hachi was also stunned. She stuttered, which was rare. I should, it's him. Jian Fengqi pressed between his eyebrows, feeling a headache. Only Chu Luiyue and Mu Hongyu knew about this before. After the two of them returned, Mu Hongyu specifically looked for Jian Fengqi to question him. Jian Fengqi only found out then. But other than that, no one else knew about this. Little Hachi and the others had such a big reaction, so it was understandable. It's him, but it's also not him. Jian Fengqi sighed. They were all stunned on the spot. There was too much information. I'm going to ask him myself. Madam 12 suddenly turned around and ran over. Chapter 24-27. Aunt 11 knew something was wrong and wanted to pull her back, but she was too late. In the blink of an eye, Aunt 12 had run quite a distance away. Little Hatchie's heart skipped a beat. What is she doing? Stop her. What was this place? How dangerous was it for Aunt 12 to run over like that? Before she could finish her sentence, Aunt 11 stomped her feet and ran over. Catch up to her. Little Hatchie was very anxious and quickly followed after her with Jian Fengqi. Even though Xiao Ba and Jian Fengqi weren't very strict and proper people normally, the two of them were very clear-headed and knew what they could and couldn't do. Even if they were really confused about Mu Qinghe, they could not go over at this time. However, there were too many people around and the two girls were running too fast. Jian Fengqi and Little Hatchie could not catch up. Aunt 12 ran out of the crowd and went straight to the gate of the palace of the illusory god. When everyone saw this scene, they were all taken aback. What was going on? Was she trying to break into the palace of the illusory god? Ruan Jianfeng, who was guarding the gate, also saw this scene. His face darkened and he waved his sword to stop her. Whoosh! The bright light of the sword cut through the air and blocked in front of Aunt 12 instantly. The biting cold air was very oppressive. Who are you? How dare you break into the palace of the illusory god? Aunt 12 did not stop and was about to hit the sword. It looked like she was really looking for death. Some of the onlookers could not help but frown. How could a good little girl be so stubborn? Crack! The crisp sound of a sharp weapon breaking was heard. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. They almost thought that they were hallucinating. That little girl, with just a light twist of her little hand, broke the fifth divine emissary's sword. Ruan Jianfeng was also stunned. The corner of his eyes twitched when he saw 12 madams simply throw the broken sword to the ground. Where did this come from? Seeing that Aunt 12 was about to go in, Ruan Jianfeng immediately stepped forward and shouted. How dare you! He personally came forward to stop her, and 12 Nyang had no choice but to stop. She looked up at Ruan Jianfeng, her face flushed red and her eyes filled with tears. I want to go in. His voice was very soft, but his tone was unusually firm. Ruan Jianfeng's expression was cold. Do you think the palace of the illusory god is a place where you can enter as you please? If you don't leave quickly, don't blame me for being impolite. Today was a special day, and he didn't want to make a move on this little girl. It was too troublesome. Just as 12th Nyang was about to say something, she was suddenly pulled from behind. She turned around and saw that it was Aunt 11. Sister, let's go back first. Aunt 11 was exceptionally calm as she held her hands tightly. But 12 Nyang did not want to listen. Her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. She bit her lips and tears fell. Sister, don't you want to go and ask? Why are you here? How did he become the first oracle? Aunt 11 finally started to waver. How could she not want to ask? But, Sister 11, Sister 12, now is not the time to talk about this. Let's go back first. At this time, Little Hatchie and Jian Fengqi finally rushed over. Although Little Hatchie was also very shocked, she was still a few years older than them. The current situation. How could it be explained in a few sentences? 12 Nyang suddenly grabbed her hand, her eyes red. Sister 8, I want to go and ask. I must go. Unlike Aunt 11, 12 Nyang was usually a soft person. She spoke very little and her voice was always soft. She had never been angry or quarreled with anyone. When she encountered happy things, she would only cover her mouth and smile. When she encountered sad things, she would only cry silently and secretly, not daring to let others know. This was the first time Little Hatchie saw 12 Nyang so determined to do something. She wiped her tears and said, I want to go and ask him, why did he do such a thing to Master? Did he lie to all of us? And Master? Little Hatchie felt as if a fishbone was stuck in her throat. The rest of her words could not be said. She raised her eyes and looked inside. That person? Is he looking here now? Ruan Jianfeng warned in a low voice. I'll count to 3. If you don't leave by then, I'll take action immediately. Aunt 11 suddenly raised her eyes and looked at him coldly. We have something to ask Muqinghe. Who do you think you are? Yuan Jianfeng did not have time to get angry about the second half of the sentence. His attention was all on the first half of the sentence. How dare you? His face immediately turned cold. When the surrounding people heard Aunt 11's words, they instantly went into an uproar. What did she say? Who's she going to ask? It seems to be the first oracle? Hiss, is she looking for death? Not only did she call the first oracle by his name, but she also used such an interrogative tone. I think these people have all gone crazy. Jian Fengqi was very anxious. I said, let's go back first. I'll explain it to you in detail later. Before he could finish, an indifferent and low voice suddenly came from the palace of the illusory god. Jianfeng, is this how you guard the door? They were all stunned. This voice was very familiar. This tone was unfamiliar. Yuan Jianfeng's heart skipped a beat. He immediately turned around and said, reporting to the first oracle, these people said they want to see you, I won't see them. Muqinghe's voice was extremely cold. If anyone tries to force their way into the palace of the illusory god, kill them on the spot. Hearing this, everyone quieted down. Inside and outside the palace of the illusory god, there was a dead silence. Chu Luiyue looked down at the ground in front of him and suddenly smiled. Chapter 24-28. Then she walked towards the door. Sheng Guanjing said worriedly. However, when he saw the calm expression on her face, he suddenly did not know what to say. She should have known. Therefore, when Muqinghe said such words, her reaction was also calm and indifferent. He stopped in his tracks and did not follow. Instead, he looked back at Muqinghe. Su Li and Xiao Ran both realized that something was wrong and looked at each other. Outside the door, tears fell from the corners of Aunt 12's eyes. Then, she suddenly could not cry anymore. Only a chill was left, rising from the soles of her feet, making her feel cold all over. Aunt 11 took half a step forward and stood in front of Aunt 12. Yuan Jianfeng looked at them coldly. Did you all hear what the first oracle said? You don't need to remind me. Aunt 11 did not show any weakness. There was a ball of fire in her heart, and she did not know how to vent it. A fierce look flashed across Yuan Jianfeng's eyes. Just as he was about to make a move, he suddenly heard a laughing voice behind him. Fifth oracle. He paused and looked back. Subconsciously, he frowned. Sheng Guanyu? Did he see that his subordinates were in trouble and could not sit still? Chu Luiyue seemed to have seen through his thoughts. The corners of his lips curled up slightly and he smiled casually. Our Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 are still young. They made a mistake on impulse, but it was purely unintentional. Fifth oracle, you won't really hold it against them, right? When he said this, Yuan Jianfeng suddenly choked. He looked at the two girls standing together and then looked at the broken sword that was thrown on the ground. For a moment he fell into silence. She did indeed look like a weak and delicate little girl. However, her combat strength had nothing to do with this word. Since Chu Luiyue had said so, he could not continue to hold on to it. However, if he really let it go, it would be a little embarrassing. He thought for a moment and only sneered coldly. These people are extremely presumptuous. They offended the first oracle. How can we let it go just like that? Chu Luiyue smiled. They just mistook the first divine emissary for an old friend. These words sounded a little strange. Mistaken? Old friend? What was the identity of the first oracle? How muddle-headed were they to mistake him? Moreover, that little girl had clearly called out the name of the first oracle. It didn't seem like a mistake. Calling the first oracle by his name is wrong. Even if he is wrong, shouldn't the first oracle be the one to judge and punish him? When Chu Luiyue said this, he turned around and looked at the man standing on top. First divine envoy, are you going to kill them on the spot? There was a smile on her lips as she asked in a casual manner. However, that pair of clear and bright eyes were suffused with a sharp and cold light. When it landed on one's body, it almost caused one to feel a faint pain. Muqinghe had one hand behind her back. The expression on her face was unfathomable. Everyone waited quietly, and the air seemed to have frozen at this moment. After a while, he finally heard the monotonous voice. "There won't be a next time." Yuan Jianfeng opened his mouth, but in the end he respectfully responded. Yes. The first oracle had always been decisive and ruthless. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stay in this position for tens of thousands of years. Even if he hadn't come out of seclusion in recent years, he could still suppress the second oracle. This kind of temperament and courage was not something an ordinary person could compare to. Yuan Jianfeng originally thought that the first oracle would give an extremely severe punishment as a warning, but he didn't expect that he would just let it go. Probably because he didn't want to waste time and energy on these trivial matters. After all, the highlight of today's show was still in the palace of the illusory god. If he were to argue with the two little girls at this time, it would indeed seem like he wasn't magnanimous enough. With this thought, Yuan Jianfeng gradually dispelled the doubts in his heart. Chu Liwei looked at 12 Madam, and the frost between her eyebrows faded away. Okay, 12 Madam, don't cry. 12 Madam looked at her in a daze. Master, already knew? Little Hachi, take them outside and wait. When things are over here, I will go back. Little Hachi hurriedly said. Oh, okay. As she spoke, she pulled the two girls to the back with heartache. Probably because of Chu Liu's words, the two girls were very cooperative this time. They quickly retreated to the back of the crowd. Jian Fengqi breathed a sigh of relief, then looked at Mu Qinghe in the distance, and then looked at Chu Liu. After a moment, he finally let out a long sigh. Don't worry, I will take good care of them. Chu Liu's lips curled up slightly. Thank you. Jian Fengqi hesitantly opened his mouth. After thinking for a long time, he finally swallowed the rest of his words. The scene in front of him was better than any words, and there was really nothing to say. He turned and followed little Hachi and the others. Chu Liu went back. Seeing her return, Su Li pulled her with one hand and patted her chest lightly with the other. Little you are too bold, you actually went over like this? Fortunately, nothing happened. She was really worried that the first god's emissary would not let this matter go, and even vent his anger on Chu Liu. After all, even the second god's emissary knelt outside his door for 3 whole days, let alone others. He was definitely not a person to be trifled with. Chu Liu's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Her red lips curled up slightly, and she tilted her head and laughed. The first god's emissary is broad-minded and kind-hearted. What is there to worry about? Su Li's eyelids twitched. These words, it obviously sounded like a compliment, but why did she hear a trace of bone-chilling coldness in them? Little Hachi pulled Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 to an open space behind the crowd. Looking at Aunt 12 crying until her eyes and nose were red, she sighed and took out a handkerchief to wipe the tears on her face. Okay, our Aunt 12 is the most obedient, don't cry. Aunt 12 shook her head, bit her lip, and said, Sister 8, I'm not crying anymore. Ever since she heard Mu Qinghe's words, she was so cold that she could not shed any tears. Aunt 11 was fine, she did not cry, but her expression, clearly, she had not completely recovered from the impact of this matter. Aunt 12 paused and asked, Sister 8, Master said we have the wrong person? Yes, we have the wrong person. Without waiting for little Hachi to speak, Aunt 11 suddenly said firmly, He is the first god's emissary, not Brother Qinghe. As time passed, more cultivators appeared in the palace of the illusory god. Soon, a familiar figure came into view. Seeing the person, Chu Liwei raised her eyebrows slightly and took the initiative to greet him. Master Nan, long time no see. How have you been? Nan Jinshu, who wanted to pretend that he did not see and pass by quietly, suddenly froze. He slowly raised his head and looked over, revealing an extremely awkward smile. Chapter 24-29. His smile was uglier than his crying face. It was obvious that Chu Liwei had traumatized him. Nan Jinshu had seen Chu Liwei from afar when he arrived. He couldn't help it. Some people would easily stand out no matter where they went. Besides, Nan Jinshu was really afraid of her. After learning his lesson last time, Nanjin Shu had learned his lesson. He didn't confront Chu Luiwei head-on anymore and avoided her whenever he could. Chu Luiwei hadn't been in the palace of the illusory god recently, so he was able to relax for a while. However, he couldn't avoid today's situation. Everyone in the palace of the illusory god had gathered here, let alone the palace of the illusory god. He had no choice but to come. Chu Luiwei glanced at Nanjin Shu. It seems that Patriarch Nan hasn't made any breakthroughs recently. Nanjin Shu's expression darkened. She still had the nerve to say that? If it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have been chased out of the illusory god ocean. She had made a breakthrough and entered the palace of the illusory god. What about him? Even though he had the right to stand here and be envied by many cultivators, it would be extremely difficult for him to ascend to the heavens and become a divinity. He took a deep breath and said, You don't have to worry about that. If you have the time and energy to do that, I think you should worry about yourself more. Chu Luiwen narrowed his eyes and chuckled. Nanjin Shu was still thinking about the bloodline totem even at a time like this. Well, it made sense. There were probably many people who had the same thoughts as him. Patriarch Nan, why are you being so formal? I have a good relationship with the Nan family. It's only right for me to show my concern. Nanjin Shu's mouth twitched when he heard that. He almost couldn't stop himself from cursing out loud. At this moment, he caught a glimpse of Jun Jiuqing coming from the side. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. Family. Chu Luiwei looked over when he heard that. It was Jun Jiuqing. After not seeing him for a while, Jun Jiuqing's aura was clearly much stronger than before. When Chu Luiwei looked at him, he seemed to sense it and looked over as well. With just a glance, he seemed to have noticed something and his eyes flashed. Chu Luiwei's heart trembled slightly. Jun Jiuqing? What did he see? However, he didn't say anything and didn't even look at Chu Luiwei. It looks like everything is normal. But this was what made Chu Luiwei feel the most strange. Ever since Jun Jiuqing came to the illusory god palace, his words and actions had been strange. But she couldn't pinpoint exactly what the problem was. Jun Jiuqing came to a spot not far from Nanjin Shu. Nanjin Shu instantly felt more at ease. He looked at Jun Jiuqing and said enviously, Jun Jiuqing, you're a genius. Looks like Family E is going to ascend to the heavens this time. This aura is indeed extraordinary. Jun Jiuqing's lips curled into a devilish smile. It's hard to say for now. How can that be? If it were anyone else, that would be the case. But Family E is extremely talented and has a bloodline totem, so he's naturally much better than anyone else. Nanjin Shu knew that the person he had the most hope of winning over was Jun Jiuqing, so he quickly expressed his opinion. Even though the two of them had obtained special qualifications to enter the illusory god palace, he was still inferior to Jun Jiuqing due to various reasons. So even if he lowered his head and tried to curry favor, he wouldn't feel that it was beneath him. Besides, Jun Jiuqing was much stronger than him. And the target of his derogatory words was naturally Chu Luiwei and the others. Jun Jiuqing didn't comment. Nanjin Shu couldn't guess his thoughts, so for safety's sake, he quieted down. In the illusory god palace, other than the god envoys who had already gathered here, there weren't many people left. Including Chu Luiwei and the others, there were no more than 20 people left. At this moment, Mu Qinghe, who was standing on the stairs, suddenly made his move. A ray of light flew out from his palm. Immediately after, the ray of light split into 4 bright rays of light in the air and landed around the Chaos Holy Jade, forming 4 huge silver Xian formations. These Xian formations were extremely complicated, and their auras were heavy. Everyone's gazes landed on it. Chu Luiwei's heart trembled slightly. Even though there was still a distance between them, she could already feel the strong aura that couldn't be ignored. Just from this point alone, Mu Qinghe's strength was definitely much stronger than Yu Qian's. She exhaled softly. The first god envoy, as expected of him. Mu Qinghe said in a low voice, These 4 Xian formations are the 4 competition areas. They are divided into weapon refiners, Xian masters, celestial physician, and martial artists. Now, all cultivators outside the illusory god palace can choose a competition area to compete in. As long as they can pass the test, they can also stay in the illusory god palace. Chu Liwei couldn't help but be stunned when she heard this. What does this mean? Other people can still enter? Yes. Xiao Ran nodded and explained in a low voice. This test is the last chance for the cultivators outside to enter the illusory god palace. Chu Liwei frowned slightly. If that's the case, why did we set so many strict requirements before? Couldn't everyone just wait for this opportunity? Sai, you don't know. This test is also called the life and death test. Those who choose to enter and challenge either stay in the illusory god palace alive or die. Once you enter, it means that you're gambling with your life. Naturally, it's different from us. Xiao Ran shook his head. The life and death test has a 90% chance of survival, and only a few people can survive. Chapter 2430. Chu Liwei understood. No wonder. As a cultivator, who didn't want to enter the palace of the illusory god and become a god? But those who could succeed were few and far between. And if they failed, they would have to pay with their lives. If they didn't have enough confidence in themselves, they wouldn't make such a choice easily. After all, no matter how precious other things were, they couldn't compare to their own lives. As long as they were alive, there was still hope. If they were dead, it would be the end of everything. Chu Liwei glanced at Xiao Ran. So, Senior Xiao Ran hasn't entered the life and death trial before? Of course not. Xiao Ran bit the toothpick with a natural expression. It's better to live than to die. I'd rather wait another 10,000 years than stretch my neck out and be slaughtered by others. Chu Liwei. If someone like you isn't willing to enter the life and death trial, then the others, Sai, you're wrong. Xiao Ran laughed and raised his chin. There are many people in the palace of the illusory god who are willing to fight with their lives. Just watch, there will be many people coming in later. Chu Liwei looked up. Sure enough, outside the door, a young man took the lead and stood out. Feng Su is willing to fight in the venerable zone. This man looked to be about 30 years old. He had a strong body and a bronze face. His eyes were full of fighting spirit. See, this is the one who's willing to fight. Xiao Ran said in a low voice. TSK. If it's someone else, they'll have a chance to enter the palace of the illusory god early. But martial artists can't. These venerable gods, no matter how strong or weak they are, only have one choice in the end. If they don't choose, they won't have any chance at all. Was it cruel? Of course. But this was the rule of the palace of the illusory god. The strong were respected. This was the most irrefutable principle here. But this Feng Suning is quite strong. I think he'll succeed. Chu Liwei listened and didn't say anything. Those who dared to take the lead had to have some ability. At this time, Ruan Jianfeng had let him in. Enter. Feng Suning took a deep breath, tidied his clothes, and stepped into the palace of the illusory god. He walked straight and quickly arrived at one of the profound formations. A faint glow shone, and a powerful aura pressed down on his chest. Feng Suning's heart trembled as he cupped his fists and bowed. Your Eminence, Feng Suning, please accept my challenge. Upon hearing this, Chu Liwei was stunned. You want to challenge the fourth oracle? Xiao Ran moved closer and explained in a low voice. There's something you don't know. The so-called life and death trial is a trial where cultivators choose a divine emissary based on their region of competition to duel. Doesn't that mean he'll lose for sure? Not necessarily. After entering the competition area, the strength of the divine emissary would be suppressed to the same level as the challenger. In this way, the challenger's chances of winning will increase by a lot. As long as he can win, he will pass this stage. Xiao Ran pointed at the fourth divine envoy. Furthermore, the divine envoy wasn't chosen randomly. Feng Suning is a god, so he wouldn't challenge a mystic cultivator like the seventh divine emissary, right? Chu Liwei understood. I see. These divine envoys each had their own duties, and they were good at different fields. If a cultivator wanted to pass the life and death trial, there were only a few choices. However, Feng Suning's guts are really big. He actually chose the fourth divine emissary directly. He's used to the lightning pool for many years. Although the fourth divine envoy couldn't completely control the lightning pool, everyone thought it was an accident. After all, even the second divine envoy and the others had to work together to suppress the lightning pool. Therefore, in the eyes of the people of the Illusion God Palace, Mu Dongyu was still very strong. Chu Luiyue nodded. Hearing this, Mu Dongyu did not seem to be surprised. She flew up and landed on the profound formation. He sized Fong Suning up and smiled. "You're quite brave." It was indeed good to be the first one to step forward. Mu Dongyu had always appreciated such a person. Fong Suning's heart beat violently as he cupped his fists. "Fourth divine envoy, please enlighten me." Then he spread his legs slightly, tensed his muscles, and surged his divine power. An astonishing aura instantly exploded. Upon seeing this scene, Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes slightly. This Fong Suning was indeed a top existence among the gods. He just didn't know if he could beat Mu Dongyu in this round. In the next moment, Fong Suning's figure suddenly disappeared. Mu Dongyu's expression turned serious, and he immediately attacked. As if he had eyes on the back of his head, he turned around and threw out a palm without hesitation. Bang! A muffled sound rang out. The two's fists collided. This was their first move. Fong Suning clearly didn't hold back and used his full strength. It was indeed the only way to fight an expert like Mu Dongyu head-on. There might be some hope if he finished the battle quickly, but the longer he dragged it out, the more disadvantageous it would be for the challenger. After all, although their realms were suppressed to the same level, as a divine envoy, Mu Dongyu's strength was still stored up. The longer he endured, the harder it would be. Fong Suning also understood this, so he used a killing move from the start. Astonishing energy fluctuations spread out in all directions with the two as the center. However, when the violent energy reached the edge of the arena, it seemed to have encountered an invisible barrier that quietly devoured and annihilated it. All the confrontations and killings were firmly trapped in that region. After a moment of stalemate, blood slowly flowed out of the corner of Fong Suning's mouth. Obviously, Mu Dongyu wasn't that easy to deal with. She was the fourth divine envoy after all. I'm afraid it'll be a little difficult for him to win this round. Even if he wins, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory. Chu Luiyue whispered. An intense battle was unavoidable. So what if it's a Pyrrhic victory? As long as he can ascend to the heavens and become a god, the price is actually nothing. Xiao Ran seemed to be used to this. "Oh, by the way, I remember that some time ago, you had a kid who also became a god?" Chu Luiyue was stunned. "You mean little Zhou? He didn't come?" Xiao Ran glanced outside the door. Although the young man with soft, short golden hair was taciturn, he was extremely talented and strong. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment. Indeed, she hadn't seen little Zhou much recently. However, even if he came, she didn't agree to let him enter this life and death stage. He just became a god not long ago, so his chances of winning are probably not high, she said with a smile. Xiao Ran thought about it and agreed. He rubbed his chin. "Hey, other than him, don't you have a few subordinates who are also quite strong?" "Cini? Cini? Is that his name? He didn't come either?" Chapter 2431. Xiao Ran was very good at reading people. Although he hadn't seen Cini many times, he was certain that he was definitely not ordinary. If he came, he might really succeed. But now he didn't see anyone. This was a little strange. He seems to be the boss of your subordinates? He actually didn't come on such an important day? Xiao Ran was very surprised. Chu Luiyue was also stunned. It was fine if she didn't think of it before, but now that Xiao Ran said this, it seemed to be true. After she and Rong Xiu finished the game of chess, she came straight over and didn't see Cini. At that time, she casually asked, and little Hachi only said that Cini seemed to be busy. It had been a while, but he still hadn't come over. If he's willing to help, I think. He can also enter the palace of the illusory god, right? Xiao Ran said. He even felt that more than one of Chu Luiyue's subordinates could do it. After all, there was already Qi Han. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment and smiled. They always have their own ideas. Supreme Dr. Liang He, please fight. Suddenly, A familiar voice came from outside the door. Many people looked over. A man walked out of the crowd. Chu Luiyue took a closer look. It was Liang He. However, the current him had undergone a huge change compared to the past. He had lost a lot of weight and had green stubble. His cheeks were slightly sunken, and his eyes were lifeless. He looked extremely haggard and didn't have the slightest bit of his former high spirits. One had to know that he was the youngest supreme doctor in the entire illusory god palace. Everyone, including Shu Jing, felt that he was the most likely to successfully enter the palace of the illusory god. Unfortunately, after suffering a series of blows, he had almost lost all his confidence. He was in a daze all day and couldn't improve in alchemy. It had dragged on until now, resulting in its current state. If it wasn't for Mu Qinghe's bell, he wouldn't even know what day it was. After hesitating for a while, Liang He decided to come over. After all, he had put in a lot of effort before, and he was unwilling to give up now. Seeing Liang He arrive, the crowd fell silent for a moment. Yuan Jianfeng frowned slightly and glanced at him. Come in. However, Liang He did not enter immediately. Instead, he turned around, as if he was looking for something. In next to no time, he saw the enchanting figure behind the crowd, and his gaze stopped as a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in his eyes. Not far away, Jian Fengqi opened his folding fan with a swish and said with a faint smile, "Hey, Liang He is looking at you." Little Hachi raised her eyes and glanced at him. She didn't seem to care. "I'm a natural beauty. Isn't it normal for someone to look at me?" Jian Fengqi was speechless. Aunt 11 followed his gaze and said expressionlessly, "It's useless even if he looks. His looks can't enter Sister 8's eyes. Besides, isn't Sister 8 already married to Sister 8? She had always been objective and fair." Little Hachi almost choked on her saliva. Cough, cough, cough. "You guys, Sister, I'm afraid it's not good for us to be so direct." Aunt 12 said hesitantly in a low voice. Aunt 11 asked back, "Then tell me, between Sister 8's husband and that man, who's better looking?" Aunt 12 answered honestly, "Sister 8's husband." "Then it's him." She had always been objective and fair. "Besides, Sister 8's husband is one of us, and that Liang He is an outsider. We have to speak for our own people. If we don't speak harshly enough, and he thinks there's still hope, then wouldn't we be causing trouble for Sister 8 and Sister 8's husband?" Aunt 12 thought about it and felt that her words made sense. She blushed and admitted her mistake. I understand." Little Hachi was speechless. Jian Fengqi was gloating at the side. After laughing enough, he said, "Little Hachi, I'll leave these two girls to you." Little Hachi glared at him. "What do you mean?" Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows slightly. "What else can I do?" "Want to go to the palace of the illusory god to find little Hongyu?" Little 8 looked at his expression and immediately understood what was going on. Jian Fengqi snorted. "If I don't go, what if she gets bullied?" Little Hachi looked at him speechlessly. "She went to the palace of the illusory god before you did. Even if she gets bullied, you're the one who's easier to bully, right?" Jian Fengqi was speechless. He closed his folding fan and turned to leave. "Wait." Little Hachi shouted again. Jian Fengqi turned back. "What?" Little Hachi's red lips curved into a perfect arc. Her smile was charming and her eyes were pure. "Of course, I'm going with you." Liang He was just subconsciously looking around to see if Little Hachi had come here. He didn't expect Little Hachi to suddenly come here with Jian Fengqi. Looking at the approaching figure, his expression changed slightly, and his heart couldn't help but ripple. Feelings couldn't be controlled. Even if he had already given up, when he saw that person, he still, however, Little Hachi didn't look at him. Instead, she walked all the way to the door with a smile. Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 didn't follow. They just watched from behind. When Yuan Jianfeng saw Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi, his face suddenly turned cold. "What do you want now?" "Wasn't that enough after the fight just now?" Jian Fengqi coughed and laughed. "It's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. This time we're going to enter the life and death trial, of course." Little Hachi interrupted him with a smile. Yuan Jianfeng's eyes were suspicious. With just you two? This suspicious and contemptuous look immediately made little Hachi angry. She raised her eyebrows slightly, and her beautiful eyes seemed to be cold. Why, I can't. After all, she and Jian Fengqi were both master doctors. Liang he could enter, why couldn't they? Yuan Jianfeng said coldly. Of course you can. But there's one thing you don't know. Once you enter the life and death trial, there's no chance for regret. Everyone who loses will only have one word, death. Little Hachi yawned impatiently. I know all this. You don't have to say it twice. If you don't want us to go in, just say it. Yuan Jianfeng's chest tightened. He didn't like these people, but since they wanted to die, why should he stop them? Thinking of this, he took half a step back. Little Hachi put her hair behind her back and walked in. Jian Fengqi followed closely behind. Liang he fell behind and became the third. Yuan Jianfeng looked at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "There's only one round of the life and death trial of the celestial physician. Those who want to participate can enter now." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a commotion in the crowd. Sure enough, people came forward one after another. Little Hachi stepped into the celestial physician area. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Su Li asked softly, "Little Yu, why are they here? It's too dangerous." Chu Luiyue looked in that direction. Right at this moment, little 8 sensed her gaze and smiled at her. Under the sun, she was tender and warm like a rose in its best season. Chu Luiyue suddenly relaxed. She smiled and said, "This round, we might win." Chapter 2432. She knew the 13th Yu very well. If she wasn't absolutely confident, little Hachi would never have entered. Although Chu Luiyue wasn't sure where her confidence came from, she believed in little Hachi. As for Jian Fengqi, Chu Luiyue tilted her head and looked at Mu Hongyu beside her. Mu Hongyu was currently staring at Jian Fengqi with a frown. Realizing that something was wrong, she immediately turned her head with a blank expression. "Lu Yu, why are you looking at me like that?" Chu Luiyue shook her head and sighed. "Nothing, I just feel that in order to marry a wife, young Master Jian is really putting in a lot of effort. He doesn't even care about his life. TSK. He's really going all out." Mu Hongyu's face instantly turned red. "Don't talk nonsense." Although she said that, her eyes still flashed with worry. This life and death juncture, is it really dangerous? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. "What are you doing for this?" Mu Hongyu mumbled. Chu Luiyue knew that she was indeed worried about Jian Fengqi, so she stopped teasing her and said, "Don't worry. Although Jian Fengqi has just broken through to become a supreme doctor, his talent in this area is amazing. He still has a chance of winning. After all, he was a celestial physician who had grown up after being defeated by her for several years. How could an ordinary person compare to him?" If Jian Fengqi knew what Chu Luiyue was thinking at this moment, he would definitely vomit blood. However, these words still made Mu Hongyu feel a lot more at ease. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The few of them stood still in the celestial physician competition area. Jian Fengqi first glanced at Mu Hongyu. Naturally, he also heard the conversation between her and Chu Luiyue. He immediately curled his lips. A certain someone was still as stubborn and soft-hearted as ever. He whispered, "Little Hachi, just now the 5th oracle said that all the celestial physician will have to go through this round of life and death together. Does that mean that our opponents are the same? Do you even need to ask?" Little Hachi glanced at him. A celestial physician was different from a martial artist. If one wanted to determine the level of a celestial physician, there was no need for a one-on-one duel. All one needed to do was to refine medicine. As long as the pill you refined was of a higher grade and had better medicinal effects, you would naturally win. Then this candidate. Jian Fengqi suddenly thought of something, and the corner of his eyes twitched violently. This candidate, isn't there no choice? Among the 13 oracles, only the 8th oracle, Shu Jing, was a celestial physician. Little Hachi said faintly, "You didn't just think of this now, did you?" Jian Fengqi was speechless. Just now, he only wanted to come in and see Mu Hongyu. Why would he think so much? Little Hachi smiled brightly. Oh, isn't he here? Jian Fengqi looked up and saw Xu Jing walking towards them. His forehead twitched violently, and he suddenly looked at little Hachi. He lowered his voice and asked, "You did it on purpose?" She must have known that she would have to go up against Xu Jing in this round, so she was so eager to give it a try. She was most likely waiting for this opportunity to have a good fight with Xu Jing. Little Hachi blinked innocently. How could I? My master is still here, how could I not come? As for dealing with Xu Jing, it was just a matter of convenience. Jian Fengqi rubbed his face. He had a hunch that today, he was bound to witness a great battle. Xu Jing didn't need anyone to take the initiative to come over. She was in charge of Herb Mountain, so she was naturally the most suitable person to fight in this life and death round. When she reached the top of the competition area, her gaze calmly swept across little Hachi, Jian Fengqi, and the others, and finally landed on Liang He. She shook her head. "Liang He, you disappoint me." Liang He immediately looked ashamed. The 8th Oracle had indeed treated him well and had taken care of him a lot. But he didn't cherish it. "It's just for a woman, why do you have to go to this extent?" Xu Jing said lightly. As soon as she said this, everyone around them fell silent. Many people subconsciously looked at little Hachi. There was no need to say who the woman in her words was referring to. Other than little Hachi, there was no one else. Although everyone knew that Liang He had failed to pursue little Hachi, Xu Jing's words were undoubtedly hinting that it was because of little Hachi that Liang He had fallen to this state. She was scolding him in a roundabout way. Liang He's face instantly turned a little ugly. "Thorkel, I blame myself for this. It has nothing to do with anyone else." Xu Jing shook her head, and a trace of mockery flashed across her eyes. "You're still thinking about someone else at this time? Why don't you think about yourself? How did you become like this in just a few months? You're sad and depraved for someone else, but other people don't even want to look at you." Liang He's face turned red and white at the same time. He subconsciously looked at little Hachi and wanted to explain, but the more anxious he was, the more he couldn't say anything. At this moment, little Hachi suddenly sneered. "8th Oracle, what do you mean? Why don't I understand?" Xu Jing lifted her chin slightly. "It's okay if others don't understand, but you should know best." Little Hachi crossed her arms and smiled charmingly. "It seems that the 8th Oracle has a big misunderstanding about me. Since that's the case, I'll take this opportunity to make things clear today. Liang He, tell me, have I done anything wrong to you?" No. At the very beginning, this young lady had already told you clearly that this young lady already has someone she likes. It was you who kept on pestering me. I'm magnanimous and I didn't pursue this matter with you. Why are you still playing the blame game in the end? She shrugged and blinked her eyes innocently. Liang He, 8th Oracle, I'm going to clear my name today. Otherwise, if Brother Yanqing hears this, what if he gets jealous and angry? Chapter 24:33. At this moment, little Hachi felt that her idea of getting Yanqing to help her was simply a genius. She had clearly made things so clear before, but there were still people who pushed the blame to her. Did she look so easy to bully? Now that she had Yanqing as a shield, it wouldn't be easy for them to slander her. Brother Yanqing and I are a match made in heaven. Almost everyone in the Illusion God Palace knows this. Why is it that when it comes to you guys, it's this lady who is playing with young Master Liang He's feelings? Little Hachi blinked as she spoke. Don't you guys know that this lady is someone who looks at faces? A low chuckle came from the crowd of onlookers. Although it was quickly suppressed, it still caused a lot of people to laugh along with it. Everyone secretly exchanged meaningful glances with each other. Gradually, sounds of discussion could be heard. Yeah, a few days ago, I was at Herb Mountain and saw little Hachi going in and out with a man. Although the distance was a bit far, that man was indeed tall and handsome. He looked like a talent. I saw it too. Although he looked cold, he treated little Hachi extremely well. The two of them walked all the way and didn't even let go of each other's hands. He seemed to be a god. His talent and strength are indisputable. Really? If that's the case, Little Hachi really has no reason to care about Liang He. Tisk, there are so many people who like Little Hachi. Who is Liang He? Little Hachi has always treated everyone equally and rejected all of them. I met her a few times, but I couldn't even get a word in. Liang He wasn't the only one who was rejected. Why is he the only one who was rejected? I think he's the one with the problem. I think so too. If I were her, I would also choose that person. The words of the 8th Divine Envoy just now were a bit. Everyone was discussing. Chu Liyue's eyes twitched as he listened. Little Hachi and Yanqing? When did this happen? They even went to the herb mountain hand in hand. She thought about this scene seriously and found it hard to imagine. Yanqing's icy face. She seemed to have missed something important. Liang He couldn't wait to find a hole to crawl into. He hurriedly explained. 8th Divine Envoy, this matter is indeed a misunderstanding. There's really nothing between me and Little Hachi. The reason why I've been like this recently is because I've lost a few matches. But it has nothing to do with Little Hachi. He liked Little Hachi and he had indeed suffered a huge blow before. However, when he heard Xu Jing's words, he still felt a little uncomfortable. Coupled with the pressure from everyone's comments, he had no choice but to clarify. It would be best if I can pass this life and death situation today. If I can't, then it's my own incompetence. It has nothing to do with Little Hachi. 8th Divine Emissary, please take back what you just said. Xu Jing's expression was very unsightly. However, she didn't feel that she was wrong. Instead, she was even more certain that it was Little Hachi's fault. If she didn't have such a foxy face, why would so many people speak up for her? Moreover, the words Brother Yanqing were really ear-piercing. At the same time, the divine envoys near the main hall of the illusory god palace had different expressions when they heard Little Hachi's words. It was not for anything else, but because of that name. Fan Yunxiao looked at Yu Qian with some uncertainty and said, Second Divine Envoy, the person that the woman mentioned just now, it's just the same name, Yu Qian said coldly. He's also from the Divine Ruins realm. Fan Yunxiao and the others heaved a sigh of relief. I knew it was impossible, but looking at the time, that person should be here soon, right? Yu Qian looked up. That person will never come at a time like this. He will probably only appear when this matter is over and everyone ascends to the heavens and becomes a god. The few of them showed expressions of agreement. But why isn't the second master here yet? Fan Yunxiao frowned. According to the rules, he should have arrived before the life and death stage began. Yu Qian disagreed. Perhaps he was delayed by something. But it's a little late now, so the impact isn't too big. He should be here soon. Fan Yunxiao could only keep quiet. A hint of unwillingness flashed across her eyes. If the treasure pavilion had given him the account book earlier, it would have been fine if the second master didn't come. But the other party's attitude was firm, so he could only compromise. Wait. Xu Jing took a deep breath, suppressed the impatience and irritation in his heart, and looked around. At this moment, including Little Hachi and the others who arrived first, there were a total of 11 people who were determined to pass the life and death stage in the Celestial Physician competition. Xu Jing said, the rules for this stage are very simple. There are no restrictions. As long as you can refine a pill that is outstanding enough, you will pass. With that, she waved her hand and summoned a 3-legged bronze cauldron. From the looks of it, she was planning to start refining the pill directly. Sure enough, in the next moment, she slapped her hand on the cauldron. Boom. A blue flame burned fiercely in the cauldron. Upon closer inspection, there was a hint of silver in the blue flame. The surrounding temperature rose instantly, and the aura was shocking. Little Hachi narrowed her beautiful eyes and raised the corner of her lips. Then, she summoned her own cauldron. Boom. A cluster of dazzling flames burned brightly. Treasure Pavilion. In the room, Jianghu was pacing back and forth with his hands behind his back. Cheng looked at him helplessly. Second Master, it's already so late. Why aren't you going? Jianghu stopped in his tracks and looked out the window. Finally, he took a deep breath. Let's go. Digression. The 5th chapter was slightly later, about 3 o'clock. Then I realized that this book is really about to become a mystery. Haha. Chapter 2434. After the celestial physician competition started, the blacksmiths and mystic masters entered the venue one after another. The mystic masters naturally sent out Jin Yunlai to fight one by one. As for the blacksmiths, unexpectedly, no one came out after a long time. After waiting for a while, the divine envoys looked at each other. The other cultivators were also at a loss. At this moment, Mu Qinghe's voice sounded. The banquet will come later. The competition will continue as usual. Hearing this, many people's expressions changed subtly. Only then did they remember that the 10th divine envoy had not shown up for a long time. Outsiders did not know, but Yu Qian and the others knew that Jiu Long was imprisoned in the illusionary god Sea. They thought that the first divine envoy would release them in advance, but they did not expect him to wait until now. However, since he said so, he should be here soon. Someone could not help but whisper. The lightning pool has been sealed. I'm afraid it's not easy to use the Tianlei to refine the divine artifact. What should we do? This was actually the problem they were most worried about. As soon as they finished speaking, Mu Qinghe waved her sleeve. Several silver lightning bolts flew out rapidly. Then they all fell into the chaos holy jade. The sunken area in the middle was actually filled with silver heavenly lightning. Streaks of silver snake-like power swam and attacked it. One could even hear crackling sounds coming from it. This is enough for you to pass the trial of life and death. Mu Qinghe said. Many people were secretly speechless. The first divine envoy was indeed extraordinary. His first move was so shocking. This Tianlei was definitely enough to refine the divine artifact of a venerable. If they wanted to go up, they would have to summon the power of the chaos holy jade. Only then did the blacksmiths relax and start to work. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. Next to the chaos holy jade, the 4 competition areas were engaged in fierce battles. Chu Luiyue looked around and finally focused on the celestial physician competition. After all, Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi were both there. As the flame burned, Little Hachi placed the herbs in one by one. Her movements were smooth as flowing water. Even Chu Luiyue was stunned. Although she knew that Little Hachi was quite good in this aspect, she had never really seen her concoct pills. Especially after Little Hachi broke through to become a senior doctor, such opportunities became even rarer. Therefore, even she couldn't help but be secretly surprised when she suddenly saw it. Su Li's eyes lit up as she praised him. Little you, I remember that Little Hachi just broke through to senior medical master not too long ago. How can he be so powerful? Although she was not a celestial physician, she had seen the supreme doctor refine pills many times. Little Hachi's technique could be ranked in the top 3. Chu Luiyue smiled. She's always been smart, and she's been coming to Herb Mountain recently. No wonder she's like this. Su Li nodded thoughtfully. She lowered her voice and said, although I don't really understand, based on the current situation, I actually feel that Little Hachi isn't inferior to the 8th divine envoy. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes slightly. Actually, this wasn't Su Li's illusion. In fact, she also felt this way. In the celestial physician competition, Xu Jing's own strength was also suppressed to that of a senior medical master. Everyone started to refine pills at the same time. This feeling of contrast was even more intense. Xu Jing's movements were skillful, and so was Little Hachi. Xu Jing had an excellent grasp of propriety, and so did Little Hachi. Xu Jing could adjust the flame according to the characteristics of the herbs he put in at different times. Little Hachi was the same. Compared to the two of them, the remaining celestial physician actually gave birth to a sense of clumsiness. Liang He and Jian Fengqi were slightly better, but the gap between them was still obvious. It seemed that Little Hachi had put in a lot of effort during this period of time. Even the onlookers could see the contrast, let alone those who were in the competition. Xu Jing didn't take Little Hachi seriously at first, but gradually, as time passed, she finally realized that Little Hachi's strength was much stronger than she had expected. The distance between her eyes wasn't far, so she could see it when she looked up. Little Hachi stood in front of the medicine cauldron with a smile on her beautiful and charming face. Her every move was filled with an indescribable sense of beauty. That was the smoothness of her understanding of the characteristics of the herbs and flames to the extreme. As she moved, the broken jade beads on her wrist jingled. In the eyes of the crowd, she didn't look like she was refining pills at all. Instead, she looked like she was dancing. Just standing there, she was as beautiful as a painting. Shu Jing frowned. She added a few more herbs and secretly sped up the refining speed. Little Hachi suddenly curled her lips into a smile. Is the 8th divine envoy anxious? However, refining pills wasn't something that could be done in a hurry. This Shu Jing really couldn't keep her composure. I really don't know how she got the position of the 8th divine envoy. Little Hachi thought as she methodically refined the various herbs in the medicine cauldron step by step. Suddenly, a heavy crash came from the side. Bang! Chu Liyue's eyes turned slightly. It turned out that the competition between Fang Suning and Mu Dongyu had ended. The muffled sound just now was the sound of Fang Suning being punched by Mu Dongyu and falling to the ground. He had actually lost. What a pity, Xiao Ran suddenly said with regret in his voice. Immediately after, Chu Liyue saw a few streams of light suddenly fly out from the Xian formation under their feet. Like ropes, they wrapped around Fang Suning tightly. His body was covered in wounds, and his face and hands were stained with blood. He looked very miserable. When he saw these streams of light, a deep look of despair flashed across his face. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he just closed his eyes. In the next moment, his figure was instantly swallowed up. In an instant, his soul was destroyed. Chu Liyue's pupils constricted, and her heart thumped a few times. The venerable god powerhouse, who had an amazing aura just now, had completely fallen in the blink of an eye. He didn't even have the chance to say a word. The so-called life and death juncture was indeed dangerous. She subconsciously looked around, but saw that most people didn't look shocked. Obviously, the moment Fang Suning was defeated, they had already expected this scene. Chu Liyue held her breath. Although there was a barrier concealing all movements in the competition area, she seemed to smell the faint smell of blood in the air. No wonder everyone was desperately trying to enter the illusory god palace in advance. Who knew how much danger they would face in this round alone? Thinking of this, she frowned and looked at Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi. If they also failed, then would they face the same ending as Fang Suning? Just as this thought flashed across her mind, an explosion suddenly sounded, bang. Chu Liyue looked over and saw that it was a celestial physician not far behind Little Hachi. A mistake caused the failure, and the entire medicine cauldron completely exploded. One of the fragments even flew towards Little 8 at high speed. Chu Liyue's heart instantly hung in the air. Chapter 2435. Little Hachi did not even raise her head when she heard the commotion. Instead, she waved her hand lightly. A beam of divine power flew out and instantly turned the rapidly flying fragments into dust. Even the terrifying fluctuations that followed it quickly subsided. Little Hachi did not even have a single strand of hair messed up. She adjusted the dangling hair ornament on her head and threw the remaining medicinal herbs into the cauldron. The flames swept out and instantly engulfed the herbs. A unique smell with a hint of fragrance in the bitterness slowly spread out. Upon seeing this, Chu Liyue's worried heart finally relaxed. It seemed that Little Hachi's abilities were much stronger than she had expected. As for the surrounding onlookers, when they saw this scene, their hearts trembled, and they all revealed shocked and astonished expressions. Psst. Celestial physician can't be distracted when refining medicine, right? How could she handle it so smoothly and naturally, and she even had the time to look at the dangling hair ornament on her head? I saw it clearly. She didn't even raise her head just now. She just waved her hand lightly. With this kind of ability, I'm afraid that she has already far surpassed an ordinary supreme doctor, right? Definitely. Anyway, if it were me, I definitely wouldn't be able to do better than her in that situation. Little Hachi is beautiful to begin with. I didn't expect her to be so secretive. Everyone was discussing animatedly. Little Hachi's red lips curled up slightly when she heard this. If she did not show some tricks, would these people really think that she was just a flower vase? Jian Fengqi, who wasn't far from her, was currently focused on the cauldron in front of him. In addition, Little Eight's hand was coincidentally covered by her own body, so Jian Fengqi couldn't see it. Hence, he actually didn't notice what happened here. However, Liang He, who was on the other side, saw everything clearly. In fact, his mind was not very calm to begin with. The shocking explosion just now had made him fall into a deep trance for a moment. This also allowed him to take in Little Hachi's series of actions. He frowned, and a complicated look flashed across his eyes. Little Hachi. She had improved tremendously in such a short time. When he first met her, she was only a senior physician. How long had it been? Not only had he become a senior doctor, he had even. Compared to him, he was slightly better. If he had been the one in that situation, he might not have been able to handle it better than Little Hachi. The most important thing was that her mentality was too good. In the face of such a crisis, even a celestial physician would be frightened. Even if they could handle it, they would still be worried. However, Little Hachi did not seem to care about it at all. It was as if the danger that almost destroyed her pill and caused her to die was not as important as the dangling hair ornament in her hair. After that, she continued to concoct medicine very smoothly. It was obvious that she was not affected in the slightest. If he didn't possess absolute strength, how could he have such guts? A muffled sound came from in front of him. Liang He came back to his senses in a panic. Only then did he realize that because he was distracted, one of the herbs in his cauldron had failed and turned into a pile of black ash. He panicked and hurriedly tried to remedy it. Fortunately, it was not a big problem and did not affect the overall process. However, this small accident made Liang He's already sensitive state of mind even more fragile. His whole body was tense, and sweat kept appearing on his forehead. It was obvious to the naked eye that he was nervous. Even the movements of his hands appeared to be sluggish and stiff for a moment. Liang He's situation doesn't seem right. Su Li's eyes focused as she said with uncertainty in a low voice. Chu Liuyue's lips curled up slightly. Even an outsider like Su Li could see the problem. This proved that Liang He was indeed in a lot of trouble. His mentality has collapsed. She said lightly. She had fought with Liang He before. Although she won that time, she still recognized Liang He's talent and strength. After all, he was the youngest senior doctor in the illusory God Palace. However, a celestial doctor's mentality was extremely important when refining medicine. After all, this was an extremely meticulous process. If there was even the slightest mistake in the middle, it was very likely that the whole game would be lost. The previous series of events had obviously caused him a lot of damage, so much so that he was dispirited until today and hadn't completely adjusted. Now that he saw Little Hachi's stunning performance, it was one disaster after another. Su Li thoughtfully nodded her head. Little you, do you think he can still win this round? Chu Liwei paused for a moment and shook her head. I'm 80% sure he can't. If Liang He was at his peak, his chances of winning would still be very high. But now, then his mental fortitude is really a little weak. Su Li said with some regret. She was completely convinced by Chu Liuyue's words. Since she said it couldn't be done, then it definitely couldn't be done. Thinking back when they had just arrived, everyone in the illusory God Palace was full of admiration and envy when they mentioned Liang He. In the blink of an eye, he had become like this. Disregarding everything else, just this point alone was indeed a pity. Xiao Ran suddenly shook her head and sighed, smiling somewhat helplessly. Liang He became famous at a young age, so he's extremely arrogant. It's normal that he couldn't take the blow. He had always been high and mighty and was highly sought after. Once he fell from the clouds, it was the easiest for him to be unable to recover. Liang He was the most vivid example. On the surface, it seemed that Little Hachi had casually resolved a crisis. But in the eyes of the surrounding celestial physician, they would unconsciously compare themselves with her, causing their emotions to fluctuate. Senior Xiao Ran's words are reasonable. Chu Luiwen nodded her head in agreement. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said with a faint smile, "So, Liang He might not be the only one who had a mental breakdown." As she spoke, her gaze turned slightly and fell on Xu Jing. Xu Jing's mood was indeed very bad. She was a medical sage herself. Even if she was suppressed to the level of a medical sage in this competition zone, she was still able to handle it with ease compared to others. So, everything that happened on the field was actually within her perception. In particular, she was very close to little Hachi. They could see each other as soon as they raised their heads. So, the scene just now also fell into her eyes with incomparable clarity. How could this be the reaction of a person who had just broken through to the level of a medical sage less than a year ago? Xu Jing was first shocked, then in disbelief. In the end, her chaotic emotions intertwined and gradually made her angry. A lowly person who she didn't even take seriously actually had such strength? If she was given more time, it might not be impossible for her to break through the level of a medical sage. Thinking of this, Xu Jing felt even more annoyed. At this moment, little Hachi had finished refining the last medicinal herb. She slapped her palm on the medicinal cauldron, and the flames within instantly burned even more fiercely. "Condense!" With a delicate shout, the countless medicinal herbs in the medicinal cauldron began to fuse together. Everyone was shocked. Little Hachi actually started to refine pills before Xu Jing? Chapter 2436. The impact of this scene on the crowd was much stronger than the previous episode. After a short moment of silence, the crowd was in an uproar. Am I seeing things? Little Hachi is actually starting to form the pill? She actually beat the 8th divine emissary? Doesn't this mean that her strength is even higher than the 8th? That might not be the case, right? Although everyone was refining Supreme Doctor level pills, there was still a certain level of difference between pills of the same level. Maybe the pill refined by the 8th divine emissary is better than hers? No way. I saw it clearly. Little Hachi is preparing to refine the green scarlet fire pill. That was one of the top 3 pills among the honorable doctor level pills. The 8th divine emissary is refining the divination pill. Although it is usually called the number 1 supreme doctor pill, it is actually not much stronger than the green scarlet fire pill. Moreover, the 8th divine emissary is a medical sage. No matter how much she suppresses her strength, she shouldn't be slower than little Hachi. There were many supreme doctor experts in the illusory god palace. Other than a small number of them who had entered the life and death juncture, most of them were watching this scene from outside the illusory god palace. Others didn't understand, but they understood it the most. With the current progress, little Hachi was indeed ahead by a bit. After listening to these people's explanations, the surrounding crowd gradually understood. When they looked at Xu Jing again, their gazes were much more complicated. Was the 8th divine emissary not using her full strength, or? Xu Jing heard all the words clearly. All the gazes made her feel uneasy. She secretly gritted her teeth, and a trace of resentment quickly flashed across her eyes. When she saw little Hachi starting to form the pill, she knew something was wrong. As expected, as soon as this matter came out, the others immediately began to suspect her. Xu Jing was very sullen in her heart, and there was even a trace of anger in her embarrassment. Because she really didn't hold back. As a divine emissary, how could she purposely go easy in a life and death juncture? The first divine emissary was watching from behind. Moreover, the moment she saw little Hachi participating in the competition, she had already made up her mind to teach her a lesson. As long as little Hachi was defeated, there was only one outcome: death. Xu Jing had been holding a grudge against her for a long time, and he had long wanted to get rid of her. However, due to various reasons, it had been delayed until now. Now that such an opportunity had suddenly appeared, how could she bear to miss it? But who knew? Little Hachi's strength was rising rapidly. Compared to her, she wasn't any weaker. She even managed to form the pill before her. Xu Jing thought that this was a great humiliation. Her face felt like it had been slapped twice, and it was burning with pain. She glanced at little Hachi from the corner of her eye. Inside the medicine cauldron, a dazzling flame burned fiercely as several kinds of medicinal herbs gradually condensed. Gradually, there was already a fist-sized spherical medicinal pill. Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. Little Hachi's pill refinement could be said to be extremely smooth. As long as there were no accidents later on, then it was basically a success. She took a deep breath and did not want to be outdone. She started to form the pill. Condense. Boom. With a thought, the flame in the medicine cauldron burned wildly again, enveloping all the medicinal herbs in it and condensing them in the middle at the same time. Soon, the same round pill appeared in the middle of the flame. After refining thousands of medicinal herbs, they condensed at the same time and formed the pill. Such a method, as expected of Xu Jing. Fan Yunxiao praised with one hand behind her back. Unlike little Hachi's method of adding ingredients bit by bit, this method of forming the pill in one go would make the pill better in terms of appearance and internal medicinal effects. Of course, the difficulty was also higher. Although she was one step behind little Hachi just now, this move undoubtedly won back some face for Xu Jing. Yu Qian frowned and said in a low voice, "She is the medical sage. If she can't even do this, what will she look like?" One had to know that Xu Jing represented the palace of the illusory god and all the divine envoys. Being surpassed so easily, even if the competition was not over yet, it still made people feel very uncomfortable. The smile on Fan Yunxiao's face gradually faded. She shut her mouth in embarrassment and swallowed the rest of her words. Yu Qian usually looked gentle, but he was extremely arrogant and even conceited. Of course, he was not happy to see such a situation. Thinking of this, Fan Yunxiao suddenly turned around and looked at the figure on the steps of the palace of the illusory god. The man in the grayish-blue brocade robe was tall and straight, and his expression was indifferent. There was no emotion on his face. Fan Yunxiao retracted her gaze and could not help but think in her heart, the first divine envoy is still the first divine envoy after all. He is not like the second divine envoy, who can't keep his composure. That person is watching from above and hasn't expressed his opinion yet. Is it appropriate for the second divine envoy to be so impatient? Of course, these thoughts were only in Fan Yunxiao's heart. She did not dare to show it. No matter who it was, these two were people she could not afford to offend. Little Hachi is really amazing. Mu Hongyu sighed. You're almost forcing the eighth divine envoy into a corner. Chu Luo smiled and looked at her. Hongyu, lower your voice. It won't be good if someone else hears you. Anyone with a brain could guess who this someone else was. However, even though Chu Luo said this, he did not deliberately lower his voice. Xiao Ran silently looked at the two of them. Are you guys really not doing this on purpose? He did not know if it was an illusion, but the eighth divine envoy's expression seemed to have turned colder. Mu Hongyu stuck out her tongue. I'm telling the truth. Can't I even speak the truth in the palace of the illusory god? Although she was not a celestial physician, she had seen many people concoct pills over the years. In addition, she was very smart. With just one look, she could tell what Xu Jing was thinking. In fact, everyone present, as long as they were not blind, could tell. After all, her performance was too obvious. Of course, this matter could not be entirely blamed on her. If she did not seize the opportunity to counterattack, she would really be suppressed by little Hachi. If it was anyone else, it would be fine. However, it was little Hachi, who did not know that these two had a long-standing grudge. It would be strange if she could tolerate little Hachi stepping on her head and winning the entire hall. Chu Luiwen nodded in agreement. Little Hachi's performance is indeed much better than I expected. As she said this, she glanced at Mu Hongyu from the corner of her eye. Although her expression was normal, her almond-shaped eyes were still staring at the arena. She followed her line of sight and looked in that direction. A meaningful smile immediately appeared on her face. Then she sighed softly. I'm not worried about little Hachi. It's just that young Master Jian. Mu Hongyu immediately turned around. Her eyes were filled with nervousness. What's wrong with him? Chapter 2437. Chu Luiyue suddenly stopped talking. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Hongyu, why are you so nervous? I'm not nervous. Mu Hongyu subconsciously retorted. When she met Chu Luiyue's clear eyes, which seemed to see through everything, she felt a little guilty and looked away. I just thought that since we're all friends. I was just asking. She had seen Fang Suning's tragic death clearly. Naturally, she couldn't help but think of Jian Fengqi. Little Hachi's side was basically guaranteed to win, but Jian Fengqi, if he wasn't careful, he might really lose his life here. Although she often bickered with Jian Fengqi, she still didn't want anything to happen to him. Chu Luiyue didn't expose her. He smiled and said, I say. First young Master Jian is about to form his pill. Mu Hongyu was stunned. What? Chu Luiyue lifted his chin. Mu Hongyu subconsciously looked up and saw that the flames in Jian Fengqi's medicine cauldron were suddenly burning wildly. Condense! With a clear shout, the herbs in the medicine cauldron began to quickly gather towards the center. Very quickly, a pill the size of a fist appeared in the flames. Mu Hongyu's eyes widened slightly. Lu Yu, just now he sounded so worried. What was he trying to do? Chu Luiyue coughed and said seriously, I just thought that first young Master Jian was a little behind. It's really a pity that he only got third place. Mu Hongyu was confused. Of the two people in front, one was the 8th divine envoy, Shu Jing, and the other was Little 8. Wasn't it already very good that he was able to fight his way out of the encirclement and obtain the third place? Looking at the smile that slowly appeared on Chu Luiyue's lips, she suddenly came back to her senses. Lu Yu, you did it on purpose? Chu Luiyue lowered his voice. If eldest young Master Jian knows that you are so worried about him, he will become arrogant again. Mu Hongyu's face immediately turned red. She bit her lips and wanted to defend herself, but when she thought of her performance just now, she really didn't know what to say. She could only puff up her cheeks and keep quiet. She was indeed worried that Jian Fengqi would not be able to pass the test. Chu Luiyue silently made a mental note for first young Master Jian. This brat owed her a lot of favors now. Jian Fengqi's pill formation attracted a lot of attention. After all, compared to Little Hachi, his reputation in the illusory god palace wasn't as big. Now, he was almost following Little Hachi's pill formation closely, which immediately made many people look at him in a new light. That person is Jian Fengqi or something. Why is he so powerful? I remember that he was with Shangguan Yu and the others. I only knew that he seemed to have broken through to the Supreme Doctor level, but I didn't expect that now. Hiss. Then what's going on with Shangguan Yu? It's fine that he's abnormal, but the people around him are also so amazing. Do you want others to live? If there were only 1 or 2 people, perhaps it wouldn't be considered Chu Luiyue's fault. But now, most of the people who performed well in the illusory god palace were extremely close to her. How could people not think about it? Some people's gazes fell on Chu Luiyue again, full of suspicion and sizing him up. Chu Luiyue turned a blind eye. Jian Fengqi had been tempered by her for so many years, so it wasn't surprising that he had this ability. Time passed. On the 4 competition areas, the competition was going on separately. More and more people failed. Without a doubt, these people were killed on the spot the moment they lost. The smell of blood in the air seemed to be heavier. The onlookers also gradually quieted down. The atmosphere was solemn and cold. Including the celestial physician area that Chu Luiyue cared about the most, for supreme doctors had already fallen one after another. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. This life and death situation is indeed difficult. In other words, it was cruel and bloody to the extreme. Xiao Ran heard her voice and shook his head helplessly. It can't be helped. Everyone wants to become the strongest existence in the world, but it's not that easy. The moment this choice was made, everything was decided. It's not easy for Supreme God, Supreme Doctor, Supreme Grandmaster, Supreme Artificer to grow. It's a pity to use this competition to decide their life and death. Chu Luiyue sighed. Xiao Ran heard this and shook his head. You're right, but there are thousands of cultivators in the world, and everyone is at the top. Those who can't compete will naturally be eliminated. This is the rule of the illusory God Palace. It's not that easy to cultivate and become an expert. Those who can break through the encirclement and become a top expert, which one of them didn't go through hardships? Not to mention the others, just these few divine envoys, back then, they also went through extremely fierce battles to reach their current positions. Hearing this, Chu Liyue's heart moved, and she turned to look at the divine envoys standing not far away. No, she didn't admit that Xiao Ran's words were indeed very reasonable. The divine envoys were indeed high and mighty, but this identity was also a symbol of their strength. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the person on the 9th step. After a moment, she retracted her gaze. After a while, the pill in little Hachi's medicine cauldron was finally condensed to the size of a longan. Lines of lines stretched across it, shining brilliantly. Waves of invisible energy waves began to spread in all directions. Buzz, this energy collided with the medicine cauldron, and immediately a distant sound was heard. Little Hachi's eyes were bright. It's about to succeed. She carefully controlled the flame in the medicine cauldron and carried out the final refinement. At the same time, Shu Jing's brows were slightly furrowed. She still needed the last quarter of an hour to complete the refinement of the pill. But little Hachi's side had already begun to finish. Moreover, from the current situation, little Hachi's green glass scarlet fire pill was most likely going to succeed. Thinking of this, Shu Jing's heart felt like it was on fire. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. What should I do in order to win this match beautifully and get rid of little 8 at the same time? Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the illusory God Palace. Hearing the commotion, Chu Liyue glanced over. 2 familiar faces came into view. Chapter 2438. It was Jiao Long and Shi Yan. She hadn't seen them since the last time they met at the Godslayer Mound. She looked at the two of them carefully. On the surface, there wasn't much difference from when he first saw them. However, they seemed to have lost some weight, and their expressions also seemed to be a little tired. It was clear that they had not been living well during this period of time. Jiao Long and Shi Yan stopped in front of the Holy Chaos Jade and bowed respectfully. Jiao Long, Shi Yan, is late. Please forgive me, First Divine Envoy. Mu Qinghe's expression didn't change. It's fine. Shi Yan, the artifact master competition has begun. Go ahead. Yes. Shi Yan nodded and walked over. Jiao Long walked around the Holy Chaos Jade and headed inside. Suddenly, he stopped and narrowed his eyes. Chu Liyue raised her brows slightly, met his gaze, and calmly greeted him. 9th Divine Envoy, long time no see. How have you been? Jiao Long's mouth twitched. How could she not know if they were doing well? If not for her, he and Shi Yan wouldn't have been imprisoned in the illusionary God Sea and suffered for so long. But Jiao Long only dared to think about it. He didn't dare to say it out loud. She was the Emperor's subordinate. Initially, he was unaware of the other party's background, so it was one thing for him to offend the latter. But now, he had already suffered. How could he make the same mistake again? Jiao Long took a deep breath and forced a smile on her face. I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. As soon as he said this, everyone was speechless. What was wrong with the 9th Divine Envoy? Why was he so polite to Chu Liyue? Everyone looked at Jiao Long and Chu Liyue suspiciously. Anyone could tell that something was wrong. Even Chu Liyue was stunned. The last time they met in the Godslayer Mound, the 9th Divine Envoy was arrogant and bossy. He didn't care about her or the 7 Chill-Du Wind at all. Why did his attitude change so much in the blink of an eye? Just as she was about to ask something, Jiao Long spoke first. If there's nothing else, I'll head over first. Chu Liyue. Go ahead. Jiao Long heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. He turned around and left in a hurry. From the looks of it, it was as if someone was chasing after a debt. Su Li and the others all looked at Chu Liyue. For a moment, the atmosphere was extremely strange. After a long while, Xiao Ran could not help but ask, You are friends with the 9th Divine Envoy? Chu Liyue thought for a moment, then said faintly, He almost killed Qi Han and Lu Feng. He even wanted to snatch something from me. Does this count? Xiao ran. Then why is he like this? Chu Liwei shrugged. How did she know? Back then, the two of them had mysteriously disappeared. Now, their attitude was even stranger. She couldn't figure it out either. Furthermore, even though Jiao Long appeared to be very polite to her on the surface, in reality, there was a feeling of avoidance. There was clearly a problem. But she didn't seem to have done anything, did she? Seeing that Chu Liwei was also in a daze, the few of them could only put away their doubts. Only Su Li murmured, "These divine envoys are really unpredictable." Jiao Long came to Yu Qian and the others and was also silently interrogated by everyone. Of course, he knew why they were looking at him like that, but he couldn't say anything now. Thus, Jiao Long had no choice but to bite the bullet and walk over. As soon as he stood still, Fan Yunxiao couldn't help but ask, "Jiao Long, what's wrong with you?" Jiao Long's heart skipped a beat. "No, nothing." "Nothing? If nothing, why are you treating Shangguan Yu like this?" There are so many people here, but you only greeted her." Jiao Long broke out in cold sweat. How was he supposed to answer this? He subconsciously raised his head and looked at Mu Qinghe, who was standing above. When he and Shi Yan were punished to the illusionary god Ocean, the first divine envoy had warned them not to spread this matter. Since she was the emperor's person, then this identity. Of course, the emperor had to be willing to reveal it. Now that the emperor hadn't arrived yet, he didn't have the guts to reveal this matter. Thus, he could only endure it. I didn't." Before he could finish speaking, a loud sound suddenly came from behind. For a moment, everyone looked in that direction. Yu Qian frowned. She's about to form the pill. This she wasn't referring to the eighth divine envoy, Shu Jing, but Little Hachi. Following the heavy and melodious sound of the collision, the pill in the medicine cauldron was finally completed. Little Hachi was delighted. She immediately stretched out her hand and was about to take it. However, at this moment, an even more shocking sound of collision suddenly came from beside her. Boom! In an instant, flames soared and sparks flew everywhere. It was Shu Jing. Following closely behind, Little Hachi finished refining the pill. She slammed her hand on the medicine cauldron. A vigorous and astonishing power instantly began to spread out in all directions. No one saw that her fingertips, which were pressed tightly against the medicine cauldron, moved slightly. A hidden force quietly spread toward Little Hachi. Little Adi was shocked and had no time to do anything else. His first reaction was to pounce forward and protect that green glaze scarlet fire pill. Bang! That tyrannical and ferocious aura instantly slammed into her body. Her body shook, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Digression, 5th update, around 12:30 p.m. Chapter 2439. Little Hachi. Chu Liwei was shocked and immediately ran in that direction. Qi Han did not hesitate and followed closely behind. Su Li and the others were stunned for a moment. Seeing this, they did not care about anything else and rushed forward. However, when Chu Liwei arrived outside the competition area, she was suddenly stopped by an invisible force. Mu Qinghe's voice was cold and indifferent. No one is allowed to come near the life and death juncture. Chu Liwei suddenly turned her head and stared at that figure. Although there was still a distance between them, she could still clearly see the undisguised coldness on that face. When he met her gaze, his expression did not change at all. It was bone-chillingly cold. Chu Liwei gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. At this moment, Shu Jing leaped and put the divination pill into the jade box. As the jade box was sealed, she landed lightly on the ground. A rich medicinal fragrance spread in the air. Obviously, this medicinal pill of hers had been successfully refined. However, Little Hachi, who was not far away, was in a completely different situation. The impact of the force just now was too sudden. She only wanted to protect the pill and did not have time to set up a defense for herself. This time, she directly crashed into the medicine cauldron. The corners of her mouth and chest were stained with blood. It was bright red and glaring. However, Her complexion was extremely pale. It was obvious that she had suffered severe internal injuries. At this moment, she was half leaning on the side of the medicine cauldron. She supported herself with one hand, and her knuckles were white. "Little Hachi, are you okay?" Chu Liuyue's heart was burning like crazy. Little Hachi raised her hand and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. Master, don't worry. I'm fine," she spoke slowly, but she was unprecedentedly weak. Chu Liuyue's heart instantly felt like it was being squeezed tightly by something. "How is this fine?" Little Hachi licked her lips. A rich, sweet, and fishy taste filled her mouth and tongue. She slowly raised her head and looked at Shu Jing. Her usually enchanting and charming eyes were now filled with a cold luster. "Eighth Oracle, what's the point of a sneak attack?" Shu Jing's expression was calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Huh." Little Hachi seemed to have heard a joke and laughed coldly. "You don't know? Do you dare to say that you didn't take advantage of the opportunity to secretly make a move on me and destroy my pill?" Shu Jing's expression. "What I'm refining is the number 1 pill of the senior doctor, divination pill. When I was forming the pill, it would cause a huge commotion. It was normal and I didn't do it on purpose. Besides, no one else was affected, but you were the one who got into trouble. Shouldn't you look for the reason yourself?" "What? Are you saying that something happened to me at the last moment?" "Eighth Divine Emissary, my refining process has been very smooth. In fact, I even completed the pill before you." "That's not impossible," Shu Jing said indifferently. "After all, when it comes to refining pills, no one knows what will happen until the very last moment. You said that I deliberately targeted you. Do you have any evidence?" Little Hachi swallowed a mouthful of blood. Shu Jing was extremely cunning. Under the situation of the energy riot just now, she wouldn't leave any traces at all. Just based on her words alone, how could anyone be convinced? I've really underestimated you." Little Hachi closed her eyes. Her lips curled into an impudent and provocative smile. "It seems that the slap I gave you that day at Herb Mountain was far from enough. If I had known this day would come, I would have slapped your face until it was swollen. Let's see how thick-skinned you are to say such words in front of everyone." Shu Jing's expression finally changed. "What nonsense are you talking about?" "I'm talking nonsense? Why are you licking your face and spouting nonsense?" Little Hachi's vision turned black, but she was still holding on with her anger. She sneered. "Why, as the 8th Divine Envoy, do you feel embarrassed after losing to me? So unscrupulous?" Little Hachi's words were so fierce that Shu Jing was almost speechless. After all, there were many people around. There were many things that she couldn't say. Thus, she endured it again and again before finally saying, "I don't want to argue with you about this. There's no need to pay attention to slander. But your Emerald Scarlet Fire pill has been destroyed. Then you've lost this life and death trial." What she meant was that she wanted to take Little Hachi's life. Chu Liwe heard this and immediately shouted in a deep voice, "How dare you!" Shu Jing turned her head and glanced at her. A faint and sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Why, Shangguan Yu, do you think you can interfere in this life and death trial? Today, Little Hachi must die." Chu Liwe stared at her. She had been watching very carefully before. Little Hachi's alchemy had been very smooth and there hadn't been any problems. It was Shu Jing who had secretly tampered with the alchemy that led to this situation. She pursed her lips coldly. "Of course, I don't have the right to do so. But the 8th Divine Envoy's character has really opened my eyes." Shu Jing's chest tightened. Chu Liwe had already looked at Mu Qinghe. "You're in control of the competition area. Just now, you should know best whether or not someone had secretly tampered with the alchemy, right?" Shu Jing's heart sank and she looked over as well. First Divine Envoy, such an unreasonable person should be severely punished. Moreover, there was also Little 8. Since he had failed, he should be executed immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, several rays of light flew up from Little Hachi's feet and wrapped around her. Chu Liuyue's heart suddenly sank. However, at this moment, a sharp sword suddenly pierced through the air and flew toward them. Those few streams of light were instantly crushed. Then, a tall and slender figure appeared in front of everyone. He was dressed in neat and tidy clothes, and there was a cold aura around him. An indescribable pressure spread out from his body. Little Hachi looked at the sword and subconsciously raised her head. Brother Yanqing. Everyone who saw the person's face was shocked back to their senses. Shu Jing's expression changed drastically. Who are you calling? Chapter 2440. Little Hachi raised her eyes and looked at the young man who was floating in the air. Compared to the past, his expression seemed to be colder, and the pressure from his body was astonishing. He exuded a sense of nobility and alienation that prevented strangers from getting close. She pouted her red lips and spoke in a soft voice filled with grievance. Of course I'm shouting for my Yanqing Gij. As soon as she finished speaking, the entire illusory god palace fell into a dead silence. All the god envoys were shocked and couldn't believe their ears. Little Hachi's words, Gij Yanqing Gij, Gij Yanqing Gij? Shu Jing was extremely shocked, and the strong impact made her voice even sharper. What nonsense are you talking about? Is the divine general of the left someone you can casually cling onto? This time, the ones who fell into shock were Little Hachi and the others. She widened her eyes slightly, and there was a hint of confusion in her beautiful eyes. What did you say? Divine General of the left? She looked at Shu Jing and then looked at the man in the air. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Almost at the same time, Shu Jing's words clearly fell into the ears of Chu Liyue and the others. But Chu Liyue's mind went blank. She slowly raised her head. The man who was dressed in neat clothes had a handsome face and a cold temperament. His tall and slender body stood there like an unsheathed sword, incomparably sharp. Divine General of the left. Yanqing? She whispered softly. It was just a few simple words, but she spoke them extremely slowly. Every word seemed to go through her mouth 100 times, and she used all her strength to finally say it. In an instant, countless images crazily appeared in her mind. Su Li gasped and covered her red lips with her hand. Her pair of eyes that always contained a gentle smile were now filled with shock and disbelief. She almost subconsciously looked at Chu Liyue. Little you, how could he be? She didn't finish her sentence. Because at this moment, Chu Liyue was staring at Yanqing. There was no expression on her beautiful face. That pair of starry eyes suddenly became so quiet and deep that it was unfathomable. Under the calm, the undercurrent was surging. Su Li's breathing stagnated. Beside them, Shangguan Jing, Mu Hongyu, and the others were also dumbfounded. Xiao Ran raised his hand and pointed at the man in the air. That's not. Before he finished speaking, he looked at Little Hachi and then at Chu Liyue. An extremely preposterous conjecture surfaced in his mind. How is this possible? Little Hachi finally realized what had happened. She held the medicinal cauldron by her side with one hand and looked up in a daze at the man who had suddenly appeared. At this moment, he suddenly couldn't say anything. It was as if a corner of the truth that had been buried for a long time had suddenly been revealed. Everything was surging like a river, covering the sky and covering the earth. Even the air seemed to be filled with an ancient and distant aura, making people feel as if they had fallen into a dreamland, and it was difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. At this moment, many of the people standing outside the gate of the illusory god palace recognized Yanqing. Wasn't that the man who had accompanied Little Hachi to the Herb Mountain? But how did he become the high and mighty divine general of the left in the blink of an eye? Countless people were shocked. However, perhaps because they were intimidated by that person's pressure, for a moment, no one spoke. Dead silence, frozen. Swish. Yanqing raised his hand, and that long sword suddenly flew back from Little Hachi and fell into his hand again. Little Hachi's gaze also fell on his face. Clearly, they had the same facial features, but for some reason, they suddenly seemed a little unfamiliar. She stared at that face, as if she wanted to find some clues from it. However, Yan Qing wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Xu Jing. His gaze was as cold as a knife. Swish. He turned his wrist, and the long sword in his hand suddenly fell, pointing at Xu Jing. The sharp edge of the sword was full of majesty. The life and death juncture is the last stage to screen cultivators before ascending to the heavens and becoming a god. No one is allowed to interfere, cause trouble, or distort the truth. 8th Oracle, do you know your mistake? A piercingly cold voice instantly spread far and wide between the heavens and the earth. Almost in an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on Xu Jing. No one is allowed to interfere, cause trouble, or distort the truth. What did that mean? The divine general of the left was interrogating the 8th Oracle. Didn't that mean that the 8th divine envoy had really done something? She really did something during the competition just now. The emperor was in charge of the Pantheon record. Although he didn't interfere with the affairs of the illusory god palace, he had the right to supervise it. The divine general of the left had suddenly appeared, and it was obvious that he was here for this matter. In the life and death juncture, Xu Jing did something shameful. Xu Jing was also dumbfounded. At first, she was full of shock and anger because she heard little Hachi call out, "Brother Yan Qing." However, before she could completely react, Yan Qing's question instantly caused her to panic. A trace of panic flashed across her eyes. She tried her best to stay calm and said reluctantly, "Divine General of the Left, I don't know what you mean." Yan Qing asked coldly, "You don't want to admit it?" Xu Jing's heart trembled, and a huge wave of panic surged from the bottom of her heart. She gritted her teeth. "I don't know, you don't want to admit it." Yan Qing interrupted her. His words were firm and his tone was cold. It was obvious that he had confirmed everything. Everyone looked at each other. The divine general of the left was one of the emperor's men. Now that he suddenly appeared and questioned the 8th oracle in public, he must have been very confident. However, Xu Jing didn't want to admit it. Wasn't she looking for trouble for herself? For a moment, everyone looked at Xu Jing with more complicated expressions. Surprise, contempt, mockery. As the oracle, Xu Jing had always been high and mighty. In particular, she had been in charge of the Herb Mountain for many years and had great power. When people saw her, they would eagerly try to curry favor with her. Who knew that she would have such a day? No one was stupid. They could figure out what was going on with the current situation. She was the culprit behind little Hachi's accident at the last moment. Xu Jing clenched the jade box in her hand. Her delicately manicured nails were almost broken. The sharp pain made her regain some consciousness. She looked up at Yan Qing and asked, "Divine General of the Left, are you sure that I deliberately stopped little Hachi from making the elixir just now?" Yan Qing didn't say anything, but his expression couldn't be more obvious. Xu Jing suddenly laughed and asked softly, "What are you talking about?" "Then I want to ask, why did I do that? Who is she? Why did I take such a risk?" Yan Qing narrowed his eyes. Coldness overflowed from his body, and he suddenly clenched the hilt of his sword. It was her own incompetence that ruined the elixir. "Now you want to push the blame to me?" She sneered. Did I do something, or did the divine general of the left not want to see her lose so badly? Who knows? Chapter 2441. After the initial shock, Xu Jing had already thought through many things. So the brother Yan Qing that little Hachi talked about was the divine general of the left. They didn't have the same name, they were the same person. That day in the reeds of Herb Mountain, the somewhat familiar figure he had seen was indeed him. Because in the illusory god palace, other than the divine envoys, no one else knew what the divine general of the left and right looked like. Therefore, he was even willing to appear at Herb Mountain with little Hachi. She still remembered clearly what she heard that day. Everyone said that the two of them were extremely intimate and were a match made in heaven. They went in and out together, coming and going hand in hand. Even little Hachi rejected Liang He because of him. Thinking of this, Xu Jing couldn't help but sneer and look at Liang He with eyes full of sarcasm. Because of Yen Qing's sudden appearance, everyone in the celestial physician competition area had temporarily stopped what they were doing. Fortunately, the pills in the cauldron weren't affected and were all in the corresponding state. Of course, only someone like the divine general of the left could do such a thing. Liang He, you've been sad and dispirited for her for a long time, but you don't know that she has already fallen in love with the divine general of the left. Why would she like you? Liang He's face turned even paler. His eyes wandered between Little Hachi and Yen Qing a few times. His lips trembled, but in the end he was speechless. Everyone understood the meaning of Xu Jing's words. Little Hachi failed to refine pills. According to the rules, she should be killed immediately. But at this moment, Yen Qing appeared. In everyone's eyes, he and Little Hachi were indeed together, and their relationship was extremely good. Although it was a little inappropriate to suspect the divine general of the left, but it wasn't impossible. After all, he did do a lot for Little Hachi before. At this moment, a mocking laugh was suddenly heard. Xu Jing looked coldly at Little Hachi. How could she still laugh at a time like this? However, in the next moment, Little Hachi's words shocked her. Little Hachi lazily leaned against the side of the cauldron. She tilted her head and her red lips curled into a smile. Who told you that my pills were destroyed? Perhaps it was because of her injury, but her voice was a bit hoarser than usual. However, when paired with her languid and soft tone, it was even more enchanting. Xu Jing's mind went blank for a moment. She asked almost uncontrollably, "What did you say?" She clearly didn't hold back in that attack just now. That pill was definitely impossible. As if reading her mind, Little Hachi raised her other hand and slowly opened her palm. A pill the size of a longan fruit lay quietly in her palm. Its shape was round and smooth, and its color was bright and rich. The patterns on its surface were especially clear and distinguishable. A strong and fragrant medicinal fragrance spread out from within. It was precisely the azure-glazed scarlet fire pill. Furthermore, anyone could tell that this was a medicinal pill that could be called perfect. This is impossible. The moment she saw the emerald scarlet flame pill, Xu Jing suddenly widened her eyes and screamed. How could this be? Just now, the pill is right here. Why are you saying that it's impossible? Little Hachi snorted. She licked her lips and rubbed her waist. In order to protect this pill, I spent a lot of effort. Xu Jing used almost all the power she could muster in that attack just now. If she hadn't reacted quickly, she would have succeeded. The corners of her lips curled up into a smile as she looked at Xu Jing with a faint smile. Eighth Messenger of God, I should have passed this trial of life and death, right? Now, do you still want to kill me on the spot? Silence. The air seemed to have frozen. Everything froze at this moment. Xu Jing only felt a buzzing sound in her head, and her vision turned black. She actually really managed to protect that pill. Little Hachi laughed and said, although Brother Yen Qing has always treated me very well, but when it comes to matters of life and death, he is extremely fair. To tell you the truth, I only found out about this person's identity today. As she spoke, she raised her eyes slightly and glanced at Yen Qing with a faint smile. Who would have thought that Brother Yen Qing would be so powerful? Yen Qing pursed her thin lips slightly. Eighth Messenger of God, you just suspected that Brother Yen Qing was unfair and abusing his power for personal gain. However, the pill is clearly fine now. What you said just now, don't you think it's ridiculous? Little Hachi said slowly. Every word was like a resounding slap to Xu Jing's face. She just said that Yen Qing was worried that Little Hachi would die at the critical moment, so he stepped in. But in reality, Lil 8's pill had already been successfully refined. If that was the case, then what she said just now was clearly slander. Xu Jing was completely flustered. Yen Qing looked at Mu Qinghe. First Messenger of God, don't you have anything to say now? Hearing this, everyone looked at Mu Qinghe. Finally, he said, it's my fault. I'm willing to let the divine general of the left deal with her. Everyone was in an uproar. That was an admission. The eighth messenger of God, Xu Jing, had indeed deliberately tampered with the pill during the critical moment just now. She wanted to take the opportunity to kill little Hachi. As a messenger of God, she could not be forgiven for doing such a thing. The last trace of blood on Xu Jing's face faded in an instant. Her legs gave way and she almost fell to the ground. First messenger of God. Mu Qinghe's expression did not change. She was completely indifferent. Xu Jing felt like her heart was on fire. She was about to step forward and beg for mercy when she suddenly heard the sound of something breaking through the air. Xu Jing felt all the hair on her body stand on end. A chill rose from the bottom of her feet and instantly surrounded her. She could not break free. The sharp and cold sword aura covered the sky and covered the earth. She looked up in panic and saw that Yan Qing's sword was already heading straight for her. There was no way to avoid it. No, she had just spat out a word when she suddenly felt a chill coming from her lower abdomen. A strong wind blew past her body and the chill penetrated her bones. Crack! She heard the sound of something breaking. She slowly lowered her head. A bloody wound was clearly visible on her lower abdomen. Warm and sweet blood kept flowing out and dyed her skin red. Then, an intense pain spread from the wound to the rest of her body. Her body trembled and she suddenly knelt on the ground. Thump! Her knees hit the ground heavily, making a muffled sound. Blood slowly flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Xu Jing's body stiffened as a huge wave of panic welled up in her. Her pill of essence was broken. She slowly raised her head and looked at Yan Qing. He was suspended in midair, high and mighty. Suddenly, he frowned and walked toward her. There seemed to be a deeply hidden worry in his eyes. Xu Jing's eyebrows twitched. Yan, a gust of wind blew past. He had already passed by her side. Her expression froze. Then, she suddenly realized something and turned around to look. Little Hachi was out of energy. She loosened her grip on the medicine cauldron and her body slid down. A strong arm wrapped around her waist and scooped her up. Chapter 2442. Little Hachi was already seriously injured. She was barely holding on with her willpower. Now that she saw that Xu Jing's pill of essence was broken, she relaxed and could not hold on any longer. Everything went black and she fell down. However, before she could fall to the ground, she felt a tight grip around her waist and was picked up by someone. She forced herself to open her eyes and saw a familiar cold face. She frowned and started to push him away. "Let go of me." She did not pay attention to him earlier, but now she came back to her senses. Yan Qing, Divine General of the Left. No wonder he was called Yan Qing. No wonder Xu Jing had such a big reaction when he heard how she addressed him. No wonder he always stayed in that small courtyard and did not go out often. No wonder there were too many. She did not think so before, but now that she thought about it, there were many suspicious points. However, why would she think of this in the beginning? Little Eighth was extremely enraged, and the nameless fire in his heart burned fiercely. Let go. She pushed Yan Qing hard with both hands. Unfortunately, this little bit of strength was not enough for Yan Qing. Apart from touching a sturdy chest, there was nothing else. "Stop it." Yan Qing frowned and carried her out of the competition area. Little Hachi was furious. "Stop it?" He actually said that she was making a fuss? "Please, can you figure out who was the one who lied first and did something wrong?" She gasped and raised her voice. "Men and women should not touch each other. Don't you know this?" Yan Qing stopped in his tracks. However, it was only for a moment, and he continued to walk forward. Little Hachi began to twist crazily in his arms, wanting to jump down. She did not want to see this face at all. Yan Qing frowned slightly. He exerted force with his palm, turned slightly, and held her waist. Suddenly, his whole body stiffened. Little Hachi was wearing a short top and a long pleated skirt. Usually, when she stood, the string of broken jade tassels on the hem of her short jacket barely covered her slender and fair waist. Now that she was being held in Yan Qing's arms, her slender waist was exposed whenever she moved. Yan Qing's hand just happened to press on that warm and soft spot. Under his palm, there were a few broken jade beads, A few tassels wrapped around his fingers, and an incredible softness and smoothness. That warmth seemed to spread from the center of his palm. His ears were suddenly dyed with a faint red. For a moment, he didn't know if he should continue or, however, at this moment, little Hachi's body suddenly curled up and let out a low groan. His voice sounded like he was in great pain. Yanqing frowned and looked down. Only then did she see that there was a large bruise on her originally white and eye-catching waist. There were even traces of blood on it. It was truly a ghastly sight. Yanqing almost immediately understood that this injury was caused by her bumping into the medicine cauldron just now. And that time he had pressed right on her wound. He immediately changed the position of his hand. Little Hachi's aggrieved voice was heard. "Yanqing, you're hurting me." Although she was angry, because of her grievance, her voice became extraordinarily soft, and there was a faint hoarseness in her voice. Yanqing's body stiffened. After a moment, he said in a low voice, "I won't." His voice was very low, and not many people heard it. But little Hachi heard it. Shu Jing also heard it. Her temples were throbbing, and her heart felt like it was being squeezed by something. Even the pierced wound on her lower abdomen became numb to the pain. "I won't." When had the aloof and cold-hearted divine general of the left ever whispered to anyone in such a soft voice? She swallowed a mouthful of blood, and her hands that supported her body gradually tightened, making ear-piercing sounds on the ground. The rough and sharp pain couldn't be reduced in the slightest. She stared at the two of them. Little Hachi didn't seem to appreciate it. She just turned her head, and the corners of her eyes were red. Yanqing carried her in silence and arrived at the house. In front of Chu Luiyue. Yanqing finally put little Hachi down. As soon as little Hachi's feet touched the ground, she immediately pounced on Chu Luiyue. "Master." Chu Luiyue supported her and checked her pulse. She frowned slightly. Shu Jing had used a lot of strength, and little Hachi's internal injury was indeed very serious. She took a deep breath, took out a pill, and fed it to little Hachi. Then she poured some of her divine power into little Hachi's Yuan meridian to heal her injury. After a long while, little Hachi's face finally regained some color. But her body was stained with blood, her eyes were red, and there was a large bruise on her waist. She looked really pitiful. She sighed with heartache. "Don't do this again. How can that pill be more important than you?" Little Hachi's red lips twitched slightly. "But I want to come and find Master." If she failed, she would lose face and be killed on the spot. How miserable would that be? So, no matter what, she had to protect this emerald scarlet fire pill. Chu Luiyue didn't say anything. She took out another jade bottle. With a flick of her slender fingers, she took out a piece of ointment with a faint green color and applied it on little Hachi's waist. A cool feeling washed over her, instantly relieving the pain. Little Eight hugged one of her arms and leaned his head over, pouting his lips and acting cute. "I knew Master was the best to me." Chu Luiyue lowered her head and applied the ointment slowly and carefully. The surroundings were silent. Yanqing stood in front of them, holding a sword with one hand. Su Li and the others looked at each other and exchanged glances. Then, they tacitly maintained their silence. A thin layer of sweat gradually appeared on Yanqing's forehead. Finally, Chu Luiyue stopped. "Hongyu, help little Hachi to rest." Mu Hongyu hurriedly said, "But..." As she spoke, she had already walked forward to help little Hachi. Before little Hachi could take a step, Chu Luiyue said lightly, "Wait. Little Hachi, you haven't thanked the Divine General of the Left. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.